So then let us all be of one mind, in that we are here studying the way of the Bodhisattva in order to attain a state of enlightenment. And with our mind focused on the three jewels, and our mind focused on all sentient beings, appreciating the suffering, the uncertainty, the fear of that all beings are experiencing in a cyclical way, and arousing great compassion for them. While our mind also is focused on the three jewels, as an appreciation of our wisdom quality, and trying to notice when that bodhicitta is present, what it feels like, and then try to remember it throughout the teachings. We are studying the way of the Bodhisattva. Which is the text that completely covers the whole training for those who have gained through their own virtue and through their mother, attained a human birth. And human birth, particularly the kind of a human birth that has certain qualities and characteristics that will enable us to actually enter into the way of the Bodhisattva. And for that, we have the virtue to have met the teachers, the lineage of that path, and have some measure of interest, faith, and devotion that will carry us on to that path in order to give rise to what we call bodhicitta. And as it says, it taught in the first chapter, when we contemplate and study the first chapter as being a means to develop a heartfelt longing towards bodhicitta. And any sort of separation or inadequacies, like say, any kind of feelings of not being really qualified to enter into the bodhisattva path, we appreciate that, we should understand that that feeling comes about through our merit, that is to say, our merit, meaning we don't have the full measure of merit to wholeheartedly throw ourselves into the training of the bodhisattva. And so being honest about that, then, but yet still having an interest and inspired to take on that responsibility of the bodhicitta training. And in the second and third chapters, Shantideva presents the method to accumulate merit, the necessary merit, and to purify our mind. And through the merit and the clarity of mind being purified, then we are able to undertake that vow. We are able to embrace that vow and make it our own. And it's not something that we just do one time, but again and again on a regular basis, daily, weekly, monthly, throughout the whole course of our lifetimes in samsara. We should grow accustomed to and familiar with repeatedly taking the bodhicitta vow. And having taken that vow and contemplated the significance of it, the weight of it, according to the teachings in the first chapter, then in the subsequent fourth, fifth, and sixth chapters, we can enter into the training there in those chapters of carefulness, mindfulness, introspection, and patience, in order to not allow that fragile vow to be corrupted. So Shantideva very clearly explains what is it that does corrupt our bodhicitta intention, and how to avoid those pitfalls. And now, according to the way Patrul Rinpoche presented the teachings on Bodhicharyavatara, we come to this third section. The way Patrul Rinpoche taught it was that this whole 10 chapters are, the first 3 are how bodhicitta arises in the mind of someone who has not yet given rise to bodhicitta. How do you do it? And then the second 3 chapters, the 4th, 5th, and 6th chapters, are how to avoid that vow becoming corrupted or contaminated or forgotten. And then the 7th, 8th, and 9th chapters are the training in how to bring that bodhicitta to perfection, how to bring it to completion, to perfection. And that involves antidoting laziness through training and diligence, and then how to antidote craving or attachment. In the 8th chapter, where we are now, in the meditative concentration, the principal target is attachment, and how to uproot ignorance, which is the subject of the 9th chapter. So, let's see. Previously, we, as Shantideva does typically, first he mentions how we need to learn to concentrate, to meditate. Not basically, it means not to be distracted. Nothing will ever be accomplished if we're distracted. And so he goes over in the first few chapters how important it is to begin the practice of meditation by placing the mind and body in solitude. And in order to be able to do that, then we discussed in the last teaching on all of the sort of counterproductive, actually, let's talk about it the other way. He presents all of the ways that we should train our mind in order to create conducive circumstances for meditative concentration to grow. And so for that, we need to know why. Why should we do that? Why should we give up mundane concerns. And so, and also why we should give up attachment to friends and relatives, etc., and to give up pursuing worldly rewards or reputation and so forth. And so we covered those three topics, which are all like from the third verse back there. In the third verse, he says, no, the second verse, he says here, in solitude, the mind and body are not troubled by distraction. Therefore, leave this worldly life and totally abandon mental wandering. So the theory here that the premise is that if we're not in solitude, our mind will, if we just leave our mind if we just leave our mind to its own devices, we will lose. We won't. Our spiritual qualities, spiritual qualities, will not develop fully, because we will come under the influence of other non-conducive factors. And so in solitude, the mind and body are not troubled by distraction. So first he talked about basically the virtue and how to train oneself to be alone. And if you've even, and this is, even though Shantideva is talking about things from a very absolute, not absolute in the philosophical sense, but in a, like if you really want bodhicitta, then this is what you have to do. If you want to have the 100% success at this, if you want to accomplish wisdom, then that has to be your focus. And so our habit is we're so used to non-conducive circumstances for that accomplishment to take place, that when we, even if we know that even if we want to practice for an hour, we need to take measures to create a conducive circumstance to do that. We're not going to be able to practice the samadhi of shamatha if we just practice while we're walking around, or while we're driving, or while we're at work doing things. So even in a not a insignificant way, but in a kind of small way, we know that we have to go into a room and let it be known that we're going to take 15, 20, 45, 60 minutes, whatever time it is, that we're going to be alone. That's the beginning. Then you're there alone. You're still going to be thinking of things that you should have done in the past, should be doing now, and should do in the future. So by studying this section, just on its own, for its own worth, it will start to undermine the compelling nature of those forms of attachment that arise when we do get to be alone. So this isn't just for people who want to walk away and go and live in a cave somewhere for the rest of their life. And there are people who do that, but if they really haven't taken this section of training to heart, they will not be able to, they will waver and start thinking of other things that they start to think are more important, and so on and so forth. This is just, I know people this way. We can't just take off and start becoming a great practitioner because of inspiration and interest. We have to appreciate the power of our habits. And both here in Shantideva's text, and then when you read in Words of My Perfect Teacher, in the meditation section and of the 6 paramitas, the 5th paramita of meditative concentration that he introduces, he teaches in that text, and certainly in Temple Nakchung's commentary, his notes to guide to Words of My Perfect Teacher, where he goes into an exhaustive detail of what Shantideva here is. Uses the same kind of outline, and so you can further look into those texts. But anyway, we should move ahead. I'm going to, like I mentioned last time, I wanted to go through these, this whole chapter, the 8th chapter on meditation, has 2 main parts. The first one, where we are now, the first part has to do with how to create conditions conducive to meditative concentration. And that's about 80-some verses. 88. The second part is the actual meditation, we could say. The first part's the meditation. The second part is the object of being able to put our attention on the object of meditation, which in this case, in shamatha meditation, there are many different objects of meditation. Breath and channels and spheres of light and deities and physical feelings and mental. There are many different methods that are taught in the sutras. Here, Shantideva is using love and compassion as an object, and the practice is the twofold practice of equalizing oneself with others and then exchanging oneself for others. So that's coming in the second part of this chapter. But we are in the first chapter, which is a form of training in how to relinquish the world, basically, how to give up mundane concerns. And we've come to verse 25. So far, he's introduced different ways of thinking that will undercut our attachment to loved ones, to foolish people, foolish companions, and to kind of competitiveness and competitiveness. And a lot of And so now we're at verse 25, where he covers the topic called relying on the excellent qualities of solitude. And at this point in this text, he also revisits this later on at the end of this first section. But here, we should think of it more as we should formulate these aspirations. Like in one teaching in the sutras, I can't remember where it was, but it says how if we just take 3 steps towards a retreat cabin, that virtue of that is, it goes on to discuss how wonderful that virtue, just that virtue, the merit of that is, just to take 3 steps with an intention to practice deep meditation. So in verse 20, so this is his Shantideva's advice here on how to formulate the verbiage that we may lack in how to relinquish attachment and rely on excellent qualities of solitude. Here he says, in woodlands, haunt of stag and bird, among the trees where no dissension jars, it's there I would keep pleasant company. When might I be off to make my dwelling there? So this is what, so practitioners, at least we should aspire to live in a solitary place, alone. And here he talks about amongst the trees where no dissension jars. So trees don't hold grudges. Trees don't, we don't need to show off or please trees. You know, that's why he's saying like that kind of a place. When shall I depart to make my home in cave or empty shrine or under spreading tree, within my breast a free, unfettered heart, which never turns to cast a backward glance, we can go somewhere and never look back, basically. When may I abide in such a place unclaimed and ownerless, that's wide and unconfined, a place where I might stay at liberty without attachment, where I could do anything, I could do whatever I please. When might I be free of fear without the need to hide from anyone? Also, I'd have nothing to, I won't have anything to protect, just a begging bowl and a few belongings dressed in garments coveted by none. And then, of course, that has to do with where we want our physical, that's the physical piece, the body piece. And now in the verse 29, in regards to our state of mind, we should formulate this kind of aspiration and become familiar with this kind of thinking. And going to the charnel ground, when shall I compare my body with the dry bones there, so soon to fall to nothing, all alike? So this is, he's using this example because it was very possible to do that. And it is possible to do it in some parts of the world. I know in India, it's not difficult to find a charnel ground where they burn bodies and so forth. And it's a very, we should at least make aspirations. When shall I compare? So when you look at a corpse, there we should compare our own body to that corpse and identify it as being very similar, that that corpse and me, or my body, is the same nature, that's subject to destruction, it's impermanent. And it was, that body there was once owned by some mind. Some mind identified that body as being its own, just like my mind identifies my body as being its own thing. And I cherished my body, and that mind cherished its body that's now laying there decomposing. It didn't like heat, it didn't like to be uncomfortable, it didn't like to be cold. Just like I regard my body, that body there had the same feeling for it. Even though my body's alive, my body is exactly the same as that corpse. And it's always the same. My body is always the same as the corpse, so like that. So these kinds of contemplations you can also find in more detailed chapters on impermanence. Because our own personal experience of impermanence is death. And at death, we leave this body. So in preparation for that separation, then these contemplations are taught in in the sutras. So this form of mind, so then again, to become familiar with this way of thinking, this form of mind, this very flesh is soon to give out such a stench that even jackals won't come close. And that indeed is all it will become. And it won't be very long before that happens. Add to that. That is the only destiny of my body, is to be like that. If you've been, when people have died, almost immediately there starts to become a smell of a stench of decaying starts to happen right away. This body now so whole and integral. This body feels like it's a whole monolithic kind of unit. This flesh and bone that life has knit together will drift apart, disintegrate, and how much more will friend depart from friend? Alone we're born, alone we come into the world, and when we die, alone we pass away. No one shares our fate, and none our suffering. What need have I of friends who hinder me? In other words, that no one was with us, no one shared our experience with us when we were born. We came into this world alone. And at death, it's the same way. And there's many, of course, here, what need have I from friends who hinder me? Hinder me here, you know, of course, specifically refers to our the conditions that won't allow us to bring to perfection the three trainings, or the trainings of discipline, meditation, and wisdom, or of practicing our sadhana practice, generation stage, completion stage practice. But there's always something that others impinge on that path. Like those who journey on the road, who pause and lodge along the way, beings on the pathways of existence seize upon the lodging of their birth. seize upon the lodging of the birth. So we become attached to all of the conditions that we become aware of without knowing where they came from where they will go, and we seize upon this body and don't want to leave it until the time comes round when 4 men carry me away. Of course, this is in reference to the way that the body is transported from the house to the cemetery or the funeral home, or we could say until the hearse picks up our body amid the grief of our family and friends, amid the grief of worldly folk. Till then, I will away and go into the forest. So before that time comes, I'm not going to wait. Before that time comes, when my body is carried away, I'm going to devote myself to virtuous practice wholeheartedly in the forest alone. There, with no befriending or begrudging, I will stay alone in solitude, considered from the outset as already dead. Thus, when I die, a source of pain to none. So this kind of relinquishing the world is a form of dying to the world. Then there will be no one standing by in tears and mourning, thus to trouble me, and no one will be there distracting me from thinking of the Buddha and the practice and the other recollections that we are to bring forward in our mind at the time of death. This refers to the time of death. Therefore, in these lovely gleaming woods with joy that's marred by few concerns, where mental wandering will cease, I will remain in blissful solitude. So here he's saying that solitude itself confers its own blessings. Relinquishing all other aspirations, focusing myself on one intent alone, I'll strive to still my mind and calming it to bring it to subjugation. So this is the closing remark of this section of lauding the qualities of solitude, where our only aspiration will be to accomplish shamatha, which is stilling the mind, and once the mind has been stilled or calm, then bringing it to this vipassana, to a state of profound insight into the nature of reality. First, we have to bring the mind into a state of calmness, which means what becomes calm, like the mind doesn't become calm, what becomes calm are the afflictive emotions, the kleshas. And when the mind is calmed in that way, then one can practice this analytical meditation where we come to a conclusion as to inner confidence of insight into the nature of reality. We can maybe have some philosophical appreciation of emptiness, or even some passing, even some flashing experiences of emptiness, insubstantiality, non-self, kind of like a radical impermanence. But unless the mind is calm, those experiences will always be part of our superficial mental experience. So it's taught that first we need to bring the mind to this some stage of shamatha, and then carrying out the introspection that brings about this inner wisdom, or vipassana, this profound insight. So, and that happens when we are alone, basically. So here we're, in the previous section, we're sort of counterbalancing the counterproductive circumstances of friends and family and loved ones and jobs and responsibilities, all these things to renounce, and the 8 worldly winds, doing things to be good reputation and praise and possessions and so forth, and then the qualities of relinquishing that. Then the next major section here, there's 2 major sections in this portion. One is relinquishing the world, which is what we just finished. Then there is relinquishing or letting go of discursive thoughts, which especially are those that are attachment to objects, attachment to desirable objects, you can say. Renunciation, we could call this also renunciation. Maybe there's subtle differences between these things, but these terms. But I think renunciation is not like, I'm just doing what I shouldn't do, I suppose, which is digress, but or my own something out of not in the teachings of this. But I don't think the Buddha taught renunciation as being giving up something that you really like. Because it came out when in this chapter here. What Shantideva is saying here is you should examine what it is that you really like. And just simply by examining it, that may be all you have to do to be someone who has relinquished attachment to it. So giving up wandering thoughts, it's this next section starting with verse 39. And like I said in the previous teaching, I'm going to just kind of shoot through a lot of these sections because I want to get to the second part of this text, you know, and I could spend a lot of time if we're going to do this kind of line by line thing. I think if you just understand that this is, and I'll remind you, I'll bring it up again, that all this kind of what could be seen as bad mouthing loved ones and these are methods to antidote attachment. It's not that if you, like here, this next section here, giving up wandering thoughts from verse 39, well, this one verse, verse 39, sort of is it kind of sums up, or is a brevity. It's a condensation of the whole following chapters, or the whole following verses, where it says, "In this and the worlds to come." That means, I don't know, the worlds to come. That's a weird one. It means this and wherever our life takes us in our future rebirths. And it's not like some world is going to come, like some space cosmic, kind of thing. But in all of in this and all our future lives, like say, desire is the parent of all woe. Desire is the parent of all woe. That's straight Buddhist thought. In this world, killing, bonds, and wounds, and in the next, the hells and other pains. In other words, the hell realms and the tormented spirits and the animal realms, and being killed and bound and slashed and so forth. All these are the source, the parent of all of these is clinging, grasping, attachment, desire, whatever we want to call it. So that's the theme. So how do we let go of this? First is, as he says in that verse, he's identifying the target. Similarly, in the patience chapter, the target was what? Anger. And the carefulness chapter, the target was carelessness. And the diligence, the target was laziness. So it's that. So here we are. And if we want to let go of discursive thoughts, then the big one is going to be clinging. And if you've ever gone away and tried to just kind of relax and be content, it's your hour off or your day off, how long did that contentment last, before you started to think of something to improve it? So, and that's exactly the issue that Shantideva is antidoting. That's the target, that edgy feeling we get when there's nothing going on, that something reaches up and thinks of an object to then become attached to, then seek out. So there's like three things that's covered here. First, people have the desire for a lover, and a craving for wealth. And a craving for things, possessions. Newer things, improvements, improved things, upgrades. So these are the three sort of targets that and of course there's many subcategories within that, but those are the three things. So the first one in verse 40, he's talking about how to undermine that craving for a lover or for sex, or for a spouse, how not to, again, not to harm, or what do you say, disparage, but to, he's giving you the facts. It's the facts is what it is. And if we understand the facts, then that leads to good meditation, which means good, ever-present love and compassion. So verse 40, 41, and 42, you send your, and this, some of this is cultural, because we're talking about what, 7th century India. And so you send your go-between, I guess, what is that, Yentl or something, what do you call that, matchmaker, or your wingman, you know, what is that, wingman? We have, is that a male thing, or is it anyway, that kind of thing, you know, you send your go-betweens, boy and maid, boys and girls, with many invitations for the prize, avoiding in the quest no sin, no deed that brings an ill renown. So your desire is so strong that that's all you can think of, basically, is what he's saying here. And it does, nothing matters. You'll go to any length to gain this friend, this partner. Nor acts of frightful risk, nor loss and ruin of possessions, all for pleasure and the perfect bliss, that utmost penetrating kiss. Of what in truth, okay, is nothing but a heap of bones, devoid of a self, without autonomy. It's just a heap of bones. It's, what is it? I don't know in modern anatomy, but in the sutras, there's this sutra that discusses anatomy. There's like 360 bones, and they're all just knitted together by tendons and ligaments and so forth. And it's just a gathering of parts. There is no part of a body that is the body part. It's all just heaps of bones and ligaments and tendons and so forth, all knitted together. There's no independent being there. Is this the only object of desire and lust? So how can that be something that we would lust for? Sooner pass beyond. Wait a minute. Of what in truth is nothing devoid of self, without autonomy. Is this the only object of desire and lust? Sooner pass beyond all suffering and grief. So we should push on further, go deeper. So first, you recognize this lust, then you recognize this, that it's just for a heap of bones, then go deeper and push on further to a state beyond suffering. To in this context, then we must join together the practice of shamatha and vipassana. So that's the conclusion you should draw. So this is a reflection. Then 43, 44, 45. What pains you went to just lift her face that modestly looked down, which looked upon or not before, was always a veil concealed. So this was some tradition in that area where unwed, I guess, women and so forth, so would never conceal their face, would never show their face, reveal some traditional thing. I'm not sure if that's a completely bygone in Western culture. That's one of the things that people are expected to give up, is sort of having their face covered. Some countries it's against the law even, right, to wear things that cover your face. So anyway, that's that idea that you go through a lot to just, what do they say, meet up with somebody. That's maybe the transition from communicating with somebody on some matchup, what do you call it, social media thing, and then how to see them in face to face. That face for which you languished so, well, here it is, now nakedly exposed, meaning he's back in the charnel ground. The vultures have uncovered it for you to see. So there's no veil there anymore. What's this? You run away so soon. That which once you jealously protected, shielded from the eyes of other men. Why, miser that you are, don't you protect it now that it's the food of graveyard birds? So then, look, consider this. This mass of human flesh is now the fare of carrion beasts. And you would deck with garlands, sandalwood, and jewels, the food and provender of others. Toward your own impurity, disgust you do not feel, and yearning and a thirst for filth, you long for other sacks of it. And I skipped a page. No, I skipped a page there, sorry. In other words, we're then 47, look again, this heap of bones, inert and dead. Why, what are you so scared of? Why did you not fear it when it walked around? Just like a risen corpse propelled by some strange influence. Before it was just, breath and kleshas. And you had all this desire for it as an object to be attained. But there's, except for the breath and the kleshas, it's the same, it's a corpse. You loved it once when clothed and draped it was. Well, now it's naked. Why do you not want it? Oh, you say your need is no more there. Because it stinks and it's contaminating. But why did you embrace it, all bedecked and covered? The body was the same then as it is now. That's just the fact of it. From food, a single source, come equally the body's filth and nectar of the mouth. So why are you so delighted by saliva and yet repellent by excrement? Taking no delight in pillows made of cotton soft to touch, maybe you, as it says in the commentary, maybe you say, well, I enjoyed the softness of touching. Taking no delight in pillows made of cotton soft to touch, you claim the human form emits no stench. Be fooled by lust, its filth you do not recognize. So our desire confuses us, basically. Lustful one, befuddled by desire, because you cannot copulate with it, you angrily find fault with cotton, soft though it may be to touch. So you're not really attached to softness, but to this body that is decaying. And if you have no love of filth, in other words, if you're in denial, how can you coddle on your lap a cage of bones tied fast with sinews, plastered over with the mud of flesh? In fact, you're full of filth yourself. You wallow in it constantly. It is indeed just filth that you desire, and therefore long for other sacks of it. But it's the skin and flesh I love to touch and look upon, you might say. then why do you not wish for flesh alone, like in the charnel ground, for instance, inanimate and in its natural state? It's just naturally lying there. The mind that you perhaps desire, you cannot hold or look upon. Whatever you can hold or see is not the mind. So why copulate with something it is not? So mind and body are separate. So you can't say that, oh, well, it's the mind that I lust for. That's not. Mind and body are separate. To fail to grasp the unclean nature of another's flesh is not perhaps so strange, because it's just temporarily kind of concealed from you. But not to see the filthy nature of oneself is very strange indeed. Why does the mind intent on filthiness neglect the fresh young blossom, lotus blossom, open in the sunlight of a cloudless sky, to take joy rather in a sack of dirt? This particular one, this one is, I couldn't quite, it could be that filth, or dirt, muck, mud, the lotus comes from that. And it's beautiful, the way, open in the sunlight of a cloudless sky. But except for the lotus, there's just the body, the physical body, that is always in a state of decay. Not like a lotus. I'm not exactly, I couldn't quite unpack that one anymore. So anyway, 58. And since you're disinclined to touch a place or object grimed with excrement, why do you wish to touch the body when such excrement has come? And if you have no craving for impurity, why will you now embrace and kiss what comes from such an unclean place, engendered likewise from an unclean seed? So body is both the cause and the effect of what is considered to be impure. The tiny fetid worms that come from filth, you have no love of them. And yet you're lusting for a human form from filth arisen and replete with it. So what is the logic is there then, that we don't like worms? Is it because they're so small that we don't like them? We want something really big from filth. Toward your own impurity, disgust you do not feel, and yearning and a thirst for filth, you long for other sacks of it. We want more filth. There's some sense here, because we have not examined the objects of our desire, that we have this compulsive thing about impurity. We're addicted to impurity. Pleasant substances like camphor, rice, and fresh green herbs, put them in your mouth and spit them out. The earth itself is fouled thereby. So our human body makes things impure, is what he's saying here. Think about that. Like if you spit on somebody else's food, it makes it impure. So our body creates impurity. Then the next two verses go together. If still you doubt such filthiness, though it is very plain for all to see, go off to the charnel grounds. Observe the fetid bodies there abandoned. When their skins are peeled away, exposing all their blood and guts and discharges and excrement and so forth, you feel great horror and revulsion. Now that you have understood, So now it has become obvious. How can you still take joy in such a thing? The scent that now, okay, then now they're talking, he's talking in verse 65 about perfume. The scent that now perfumes the skin is sandalwood and nothing else. Yet how is it that one thing's fragrance, like the perfume, causes you to long for something else, like the body? It is best to have no lust for something that by nature stinks. So our body, left to itself untended, stinks. The worldly crave beside their purpose. That's a turn of phrase that seems to mean that there's no point in that. Our craving has no point. Why do they anoint their flesh with pleasant scents? For if this scent is sandalwood, how can it be the perfume of the body? What perfume arises from the human body? How is it that the fragrance of a thing, perfume, induces you to crave for something else, the human body? So then, consider, with lanky hair, with long nails overgrown, with dirty teeth all reeking with the stink of slime, this body, naked as it is, untended, is indeed a horror to behold. Why go to such excess to clean and polish what is but a weapon that will injure you? The cares that people squander on themselves in ignorance convulse the universe with madness. So bodhisattvas see all sentient beings intoxicated with desire and have great compassion and pity for sentient beings. And verse 70, when you saw the heaps of human bones, you felt revulsion in the charnel ground. And will you take delight in cities of the dead, frequented by such skeletons that live and move? In other words, the revulsion you felt in the charnel ground, now when you're walking around town, basically you're seeing other corpses that are, what do they call them? Zombie, that are a form of zombieism. So check on that. How you see others. They're walking corpses. They're corpses animated by the wind, breath, and the kleshas. Now, again, let's see, what's more? Okay, then this is verse 71. And 78. These next verses are, these last section of verses is about the nature of the object. Then this verse 71 begins the injuries resulting from attachment. What's more, possession of another's filth is not to be acquired free of charge. All is at a price. Exhaustion, he's using the term possession of another filth, of another's filth, as sort of a synonym for a person's body, seems like. And being attached to that, having a possessive attitude, regardless of the degree of it, but being attached to another doesn't come free of charge. All is at a price. Exhaustion in this life because of the increase in negative actions that occur, jealousy, hostility, competitiveness, possessiveness, objectification of the other, all sorts of physical, verbal, and mental negative actions in this life becomes exhausting. and in the next, the suffering of hell. To gather riches, so to gather riches, young boys are unable. I mean, there's the boys, it's young people. So kids can't earn money. And what can they enjoy when they're full grown? The whole of life is spent in gaining wealth, but then they're old, too old to satisfy their lust. Some are wretched in their great desire, but worn out by their day-long work. They go home broken by fatigue to sleep the slumbers of a corpse. Some, wearied by their travels far from home, must suffer separation from their wives and children whom they love and long to see. They do not meet them for years on end. Some, ambitious for prosperity, not knowing how to get it, sell themselves. Happiness eludes their grasp, and pointlessly they live and labor for their masters. Some sell themselves, no longer free in bondage, slavery to others, sort of another degree, from maybe being a servant to being a slave, entering into slavery, just out of basically maybe even slave wage, where your only consideration is getting paid. Your only consideration, the desperation of your life is such that you go to any means to get a wage. And destitute, their wives give birth with only trees for shelter in the wild. So like that, kind of homeless. Fools, deceived by craving for a livelihood, decide that they will make their fortune in the wars, though fearful for their lives, and seeking gain, it's slavery they get. They can, similarly, like joining a gang, or joining up with a gang who you have. It's a cruelty. You're controlled by cruel leaders, cruel bosses. Some, as the result of craving, meaning by stealing, have their bodies slashed and paled on pointed stakes. Some are wounded, run through by the lance, while some are put to death by fire. So this must have something to do with the punishment, the punitive system of the day, of that day, where you are, where they do those kinds of penalties, sentence you to be tortured. So that part, this is all to do with, and we can, I'm sure, contemplate both in our own experience and the experience of the world, what we know of the world, the lengths that people go to maintain that attachment and craving for others. Due to our visual consciousness becoming attached to a form, a moth, this is a classic thing here, due to visual consciousness becoming attached to the form, a moth goes into the candle, right? As they become drawn to it. Due to the hearing, the sound, the deer is attracted to the hunter who plays a flute. I don't know how anyway, there was this, the way hunters used to hunt in India, they would play the flute, certain tunes, certain things, maybe like a ducks, the duck flappy thing, the rubber flappy duck call or whatever it is, and all these kinds of tricks about hearing. And even people use mating things, sound to attract, and then they shoot. So like that. And then because of the scent, the conscious scent, the smell consciousness and the scent and the nose of the nose, then is insects are, I always forget the name of that. The insects are attracted to the flower that closes on them. What are they called? Remember? I always think I always hear that, and I say I'll never forget that name. And here it is, because there's in Oregon there's a turnoff where they have it's like a whole forest of these
fly trap
cups with the nectar in it, and they're filled with flies and all kinds of insects, bees, everything. It's like a charnel ground of insects, and they all are attracted to that thing. That it's like a long cup, and then the bee goes in, and then it closes on them. Anyway, that's the scent. Then the tongue is the consciousness, the taste consciousness of fish. Then they hook themselves because of attachment to that object. And then because of the touch, the tactile sensations, there's a certain sensation that elephants are said to feel when they get into like a mud bath. I love it. Then they get stuck. They can't get out. So all these, we should reflect on all these kind of drawbacks of objects of desire and rid ourselves of becoming, continuing to be attached to them. Okay, so, wow. We got through that part, okay. Again, like I said last week, this is not like Buddhist doctrine. This is not the Buddhist doctrine of our the view of humans. This is the facts, and it's given as a reflection to be considered as a method to antidote craving that causes our mind to be disturbed and not able to accomplish its noble aspiration of benefiting beings through wisdom. So there's an interdependent connection here. It's not to come to some conclusion about what people are. I mean, obviously, because the next chapter, the next section of the same chapter is the development of love and compassion, but we need to understand it. And again, if you read like Khenpo Ngakchung's, he's even more rough, more intense. His audience was clergy. Here, this is just general. Okay, then this next section, verse 79, I'm going to continue because there's a hope I have that we'll get through this somehow. So in verse 79, this section is the second method of giving up attachment to wealth and possessions. The previous section was the first section of giving up wandering thoughts, which was giving up craving for a lover. Then now there's giving up attachment to wealth and possessions. So that's verse 79. The pain of gaining, keeping, and of losing all. See the endless hardships brought on us by property. For those distracted by their love of wealth, there is no chance for freedom from sorrow, from the sorrows of existence. So in the beginning, getting stuff, keeping it in the middle, and then in the end, it's all problematic. He's saying, we won't become someone like an Arya who is content, contentment. With attachment, we won't reach this, even the first level of meditation, shamatha, which means then we won't be able, since shamatha is the foundation for greater insight, then we won't be able to gain that insight. And we will rather continue to be stuck in this wheel of life, around and around. They indeed, possessed of many wants, will suffer many troubles, all for very little. They're like the ox that pulls the cart and catches bits of grass along the way. So the best case scenario is that we get a little karmic fruition where something good happens, but then the wheel turns and the cart jolts forward, and we feel the pain of being separated from that little bit of grass. For sake of such a paltry thing, which is not rare, which even beasts can find, tormented by their karma, they destroy this precious human life so hard to find. So it destroying this precious human life so hard to find, meaning not engaging in the trainings, not practicing the sadhana practice, and so forth. And this is the cause, or this is the vision of the bodhisattvas, and why they have compassion for beings, especially those who this precious human birth is lost by being attached to meaningless worldly concerns, particularly here the acquisitions. 82. All that we desire is sure to perish, on which account we fall to hellish pain. For what amounts to very little, we must suffer constant and exhausting weariness. So happiness that's based on happiness that comes from attaining the object we desire is unstable. Almost the nature of that unhappiness is unstable. And then we're thrown back into another cycle of want. And here was brought out how we should also, in this fashion, contemplate the four ends. The four ends. We know that the end of birth is death. The end of all gathering relationships, two or more people. The end of all gatherings is separation. And the end of all accumulation is dispersal. And the end of all building is destruction. There's no plan B, I guess you could say. There's no other end. So contemplate those things in this regard. And then 83, he reminds us here that with but a millionth part of such vexation, enlightenment itself could be attained. Like compared to the degree of effort and struggle and pain that's involved in following objects of our desire, if we just use the millionth part of that enlightenment, if we use a millionth part of that on the bodhisattva path, we would perfect it. We would perfect that path. Those who crave are plagued far more than those engaged upon the path, upon the bodhisattva path. Yet Buddhahood is not what they attain. So that we should pay attention to as well. It's not that we have to give up this world and do something that's even harder to do. There's a millionth of effort compared to samsaric effort, worldly effort is all it takes. Reflect upon the pain, the next verse, reflect upon the pains of hell and other evil states. Weapons, fires, and poisons, yawning chasms, hostile foes, none is on a level with our cravings. Reflecting on the pains of hell and other evil states, in other words, the results, contemplate the suffering of samsara, particularly the suffering of those states that are, those beings that are experiencing the results of craving for objects and what they have to do to satisfy that craving. So reflect on the results of that craving, and then compared to our own present suffering, such as weapons, fires, poisons, yawning chasm, hostile foes, all the things. We have tons of other things we could add to that list. More sophisticated our culture is, but our present adversary, all those things only result in death. Like the worst case scenario is that all these things, weapons and so forth, will result in our death. Those things don't, how we die is not what projects us into the lower realms. Okay, so we should contemplate that. All the, none is on a level with our cravings. So compared to our cravings, all these weapons, fires, and so forth are they don't compare to it. The real problem is craving. That's what's going to project, that's what's going to cause us unending suffering in the future. It's not that we'll experience the results of our non-virtue that came from craving objects, and that the karma of that will become like purified when we go through the hellish experiences in the future. What happens when we know from our own experience, when we're having a hard day, we create more problems for others and consequently for ourselves. So suffering causes the sufferer to create more suffering. Ordinary people who don't have the tools to recognize certain points of Dharma. Okay. So take that, invest some time in that contemplation on comparing the pains of hell and other states that are the result of craving to the the discomfort and even our terminal experiences of this life, where all we'll do is die. We won't be creating negative karma by definition, that there's no comparison. Okay, then 85. Brings us to the end of this section. So I'm going to read you this next section. So, revolted by our lust and wanting, let us now rejoice in solitude, in places empty of all conflict and defilement, the peace and stillness of the forest. Happy those intent on others' good, who roam in pleasant places formed of massive stone, refreshed by moonlight's sandal-scented beams, by gentle woodland breezes soothed. In caves beneath the trees, in houses left abandoned, may we linger long as we might wish. Relinquishing the pain of guarding our possessions, let us live in freedom, unconfined by cares. To have such liberty unmarred by craving, lucid from every bond and tie, a life of such contentment and such pleasure, even Indra would be pressed to find. So then again, he's singing the hymn of praise to solitude and being free of craving possessions and so forth. So he starts out by talking about the excellence of solitude and of being alone and in the forest and so forth. And then we go through all the antidotes to the desire that will come when we do go. And then we're refreshed by his closing remarks to this section to again turn our appreciation to our present circumstances, where we do have the freedom the freedom that comes from being content and not the victim and being oppressed by worldly concerns, praise, blame, gain, loss, and so forth. Okay, so wonderful. We came to the end of that section. I knew it was going to be a tough one. I never enjoyed that, but it has come in handy. I'll tell you. And I know people, working with people who aspire to meditate or go away to meditate, it really becomes obvious that this kind of training will make a huge difference in someone's ability to utilize the good fortune to have time to invest in accomplishing some level of meditation, meditative concentration. Okay. So we'll end with that for tonight.